3 days after the world found out about Ozzy Osbourne's passing, on July 25, 2025, the envelope reached Gene Simmons' residence in Beverly Hills. For Gene, "From your brother in darkness," was the straightforward inscription on the return address, which was penned in a handwriting that was recognizable, yet wobbly. There was a letter inside that would alter Gene's perception of his bond with the Prince of Darkness, which had lasted for decades, and show a side of Ozzy that even his closest friends had never completely recognized. Throughout his 5 decades in Kiss, Gene had received innumerable fan mail pieces, but nothing had prepared him for the weight of this specific envelope. The Osbourne family estate's letterhead was on the thick, pricey paper, but what really caught his attention was how meticulously it had been prepared. Ozzy had taken the trouble to seal it with black wax despite his worsening health, using a signet ring Gene remembered from their 1970s touring days. Surrounded by gold albums and rock memorabilia that documented his illustrious career, the Kiss leader sat in his home office and cautiously opened what he knew would be one of the most significant documents he would ever read. Not only was it a farewell letter, but it was also a masterclass in friendship, gratitude, and the deep connections that bind musicians who have experienced the highs and lows of the music business together. Please show your support by liking this story if it's capturing your heart the way it's capturing ours. There are some messages that are worthy of being spread globally. Despite the tremors induced by Parkinson's disease, Ozzy wrote the entire letter in his own hand and dated it July 15, 2025. 1 week before he passed away. It had taken effort, and Gene could see it. Every statement bore the weight of a man who realized his time was running out and wanted to use his last days to articulate the things that were most important to him, even though some of the words were unsteady and others had been rewritten several times for clarity. The letter started, "My dear Gene, people will remember the arguments, the rivalry, and the times we allegedly detested one another after I'm gone, but you and I know the reality, don't we? That's why I'm writing them. We are aware that, despite the makeup, costumes, and public identities, we have been brothers for almost 50 years. And brothers never let one another go without saying what is truly important." When Ozzy opened, it was so straightforward that Gene had to stop reading. In fact, their relationship had been complicated, characterized by times of fierce camaraderie and times of rivalry in their careers. In contrast to the media's frequent portrayal of them as rivals vying for the title of rock's greatest showman, the truth had been much more complex. The letter went on. "Remember that night in 1974 in Cleveland? You most likely don't. I remember it clearly because that was the night you saved my life, even though you were unaware of it. We were all very young and inebriated by our own achievements. Standing 15 stories above the ground on the hotel balcony, I pondered whether jumping would be less painful than staying alive. I was being crushed by the alcohol, the drugs, and the pressure, and I didn't see a way out of it." As Gene read this realization, his hands began to shake. He could imagine those early touring days when they were all trying to make sense of their sudden popularity and the demons it unleashed, but he couldn't recall the exact night Ozzy was referring to. According to Ozzy's letter, "You knocked on my door at 3 in the morning and asked to borrow a cigarette. What a dumb little thing. But you didn't inquire when you saw my face. You spent 4 hours sitting with me discussing everything but the issue. You told me about the girl you left behind in New York, about your early years, and about your hopes for Kit. You were talking me down that cliff without even realizing there was one, even though you likely believed you were merely passing the time with a fellow musician who was having trouble falling asleep." Overwhelmed by this news, the Kiss leader had to put the letter down for a while. He and Ozzy had shared innumerable hotel rooms, vans, and backstage spaces during their careers, but he had never realized the significance of some of those seemingly innocuous exchanges. The message went on, "That's when I discovered something about you that the public never sees. You're one of the most innately kind persons I've ever met. Despite all the blood, fire, and demon identities, you have a talent for recognizing when someone is in pain and figuring out how to support them without making them feel vulnerable or weak. Over the years, you've likely done it for me thousands of times without ever realizing it." Gene discovered that he was recalling things he had forgotten, including the times he had called Ozzy when things became tough, the phone calls he had made out of instinct rather than duty, and the words of support he had given amid Ozzy's battles with addiction and family issues. Although he had always assumed that these were normal reactions amongst friends, Ozzy's letter was enlightening him to their more profound meaning. Ozzy added, "I want you to know that one of the things that has kept me grounded through all the chaos is our friendship. You always treated me like a friend, colleague, and peer, even when everyone else thought I was crazy, when critics said I was a negative influence, and even when certain members of my own family were concerned about the direction I was going. You never made me feel like I had to be someone I wasn't, never tried to change me, and never passed judgment on me." After that, the letter took an unexpected turn. disclosing previously undisclosed information about their working relationship. You were the one who persuaded me to go solo after Black Sabbath fired me. Ozzy wrote, "People don't know this. I was prepared to abandon music completely, return to Birmingham and follow in my father's footsteps by working in a factory. However, you told me something that completely altered my life. You claimed that I wasn't destined to be a musician because I was sacked from one band. I might have been destined to be something greater," you said. Gene had forgotten the importance of that talk until he read what Ozzy had said, but now he remembered it. It had happened in 1979, during one of the lowest points of Ozzy's life in a pub in Los Angeles. Although Gene had been juggling his own Kiss-related obligations, he had made time to hear his friend's anguish and provide all support he could. The letter said, "You didn't just give me advice that night. You urged me to call you if I ever had self-doubt and provided me your home phone number. Even if they frightened people," you claimed, "rock and roll needed voices like mine. As long as I used my danger for artistic endeavors rather than self-destruction, you assured me that it was a gift rather than a curse." Gene was especially affected by this realization, since he could now clearly see the connection between that discussion and Ozzy's solo career, which had gained him a worldwide celebrity. His contribution to persuading his friend to pursue music further had been minor but significant, and that choice had ultimately shaped heavy metal for many years. The letter went on to include recollections from their whole friendship, each of which unveiled new levels of respect and bond. Ozzy wrote about how, while Ozzy's mother was dying, Gene had unexpectedly come to Birmingham to sit with his friend during one of the most trying times in life, not to attend a funeral or make a public appearance. In his letter, Ozzy recalled that "You didn't say much that week. You didn't provide vacuous platitudes or attempt to improve it. You simply stayed near me, taking care of the little things that sadness makes tough to handle, like making sure I ate and slept. You were the one who caught me crying at the burial. You got up at the service and told a tale about my mother that made everyone laugh through their emotions when I was at a loss for words. You didn't need me to ask. You understood exactly what I needed." After reading Ozzy's narrative, Gene was reminded of those trying times in Birmingham which he had nearly forgotten. Although they had only met a few times, he recalled Ozzy's mother as a small woman with a huge personality, who had treated Gene like another son. Gene had never seen his presence as especially important, but he had felt obliged to be there because her loss had saddened Ozzy. The letter went on to say that arguably the most significant thing you accomplished for me was to demonstrate to me what true friendship between two strong personalities looks like. We might have been competitors, hell, we were rivals at times. However, you showed me that rivalry need not be interpreted as disrespect and that we can challenge one another to improve without demeaning one another. Since it captured one of the most distinctive features of their relationship, Gene found great resonance in this observation. Despite their similar roles in the rock ecology, the two guys, who were powerful personalities accustomed to being the center of attention, had managed to preserve a true friendship. According to the letter, you demonstrated to me that Kiss and Ozzy Osbourne could coexist peacefully, since we each had unique contributions to make and that we didn't have to compete for the same place. You made it clear to me that neither of us would be diminished if my darkness and your theatricality coexisted, or perhaps enhanced one another. Another secret that had been guarded between the two pals for decades was then disclosed in the letter. Ozzy wrote, "I never told anyone this, but you offered to help in a way that went far beyond friendship when Sharon and I were going through our worst times in the late 80s, when my drinking was threatening to ruin everything. You assured me that you would cover the cost of whatever treatment program I required if I wanted to become clean. No publicity, no questions, and no conditions." Now Gene could definitely recall that offer. At that time, Ozzy had been going through a terrible spiral and Gene had looked on helplessly as his pals appeared intent on destroying themselves. The offer to cover the cost of therapy had been made on the spur of the moment, out of a desperate attempt to support a loved one, but Ozzy had eventually discovered his own way to recovery without the need for financial support. The letter went on, "I didn't accept that offer, but I felt stronger knowing it existed. Even if I wasn't sure I believed it myself, it served as a reminder that someone thought I was worth saving. That information became a part of my recovery foundation and the voice in my head that encouraged me to keep fighting when all seemed lost." For Gene, this realization had a profound effect. Knowing that the offer had been a source of strength for Ozzy, even if it was not used, made him realize how powerful the simple act of caring might be. He had given help without giving it much thought, which is the typical reaction of a friend to another's problem. After that, the letter discussed their professional partnerships, some of which had never been disclosed to the public. Ozzy said, "People are unaware that you co-wrote 3 of the songs on my Bark at the Moon album. Due to label politics and contractual concerns, Other writers received credit, but you and I are aware of the reality. Our late-night songwriting sessions in your home studio produced some of my best work during that time. This was accurate, but because of intricate legal and business issues at the time, both men had decided to keep it confidential. Gene had always been a prolific songwriter, and their partnership had yielded some surprisingly potent material during a time when Ozzy was experiencing writer's block. I learned new approaches to melody and structure working with you, the letter said. You taught me that songs are more than simply emotional outbursts. They are whole experience. Although your contributions were never officially recognized, the lessons I learned from you during those sessions made my later work strong. Ozzy's thoughts on their mutual experience of growing older in the music business, a subject that had grown in significance as both men progressed through their later careers, were the next section of the letter. According to Ozzy, both of us have had to learn what it means to be senior statesmen in a genre that caters to young people. You taught me how to change without sacrificing authenticity, how to honor our heritage while still developing as an artist, and how to cope with critics who felt we were too old, too out of touch, or too entrenched in the past. We've also seen genres shift, new bands emerge and disappear, and more. This insight was in line with discussions the two had had over the years regarding the difficulties of preserving artistic integrity and relevance across several decades. Although the road hadn't always been easy, both had made the journey from teenage rebels to esteemed veterans. According to the letter, you persisted in moving forward even though everyone was asking us to quit exposing ourselves and retire with grace. You demonstrated to me that becoming older need not equate to being irrelevant, and that on the contrary, experience may increase the impact of art. Even as my body began to weaken, your example allowed me to continue creating, performing, and being Ozzy Osbourne. The letter then shifted to more private topics, demonstrating how much Ozzy respected Gene's family values and business sense. He wrote, "You created something I've always admired, a prosperous career that didn't cost you your family, a public image that didn't overshadow your personal identity. While staying grounded at home, you managed to be bigger than life on stage. Throughout my career, I battled to maintain that equilibrium." Given Ozzy's well-known difficulties sustaining relationships during his wilder years, this statement was especially moving. The journey had been significantly more tumultuous than Gene's comparatively secure family life, even though he had finally found security with Sharon and his kids. "Seeing you with your kids throughout the years made me realize what I wanted to accomplish," Ozzy went on. "You proved that it was possible to be both a rock star and a present father, both a public figure and a private person. With my own family, I was able to identify the aspects of my own family life approach that I needed to modify, thanks to your example." The letter went on to discuss their public disagreements, which are among the most delicate parts of their relationship. Ozzy wrote, "The media always wanted us to hate each other. Stories about rivalry and strife among music stars were their favorite. We occasionally contributed to that story and let our egos get in the way of our friendship. However, even our most intense public arguments, we always respected one another as human beings and artists." Gene could recall other instances where the media had fabricated or exaggerated their disputes, escalating small arguments into large-scale feuds, for the goal of making headlines. There have also occasionally been real conflicts, generally arising from artistic or commercial rivalry. However, Ozzy's letter served as a reminder that beneath all of these outward disputes, their relationship had endured. The letter showed how you would check on me in private, even while we were publicly portrayed as adversaries, something the public never saw. You contacted Sharon during our most well-known argument in the early 1990s to check on me and make sure I was managing the stress. Despite what the headlines said, you cared enough to recognize that fabricated drama may turn into genuine suffering for someone who is already going through a difficult time. Gene was especially affected by this recollection, because it demonstrated the depth of their bond and the sincere concern that had always been there, despite any apparent conflicts that may have arisen from their work life. Ozzy's tone grew even more introspective and intimate as the letter came to an end. "In addition to wanting you to know how much your friendship has meant to me, I am writing you this letter to ask for something. I'm aware that after I'm gone, people will want to characterize my legacy and condense my life into tidy categories and straightforward stories. Please help them comprehend the entire tale." Ozzy's deepest worries about his posthumous reputation, that he would only be remembered for his wildest moments, rather than the complete depth of his character and career, were exposed by this request. The letter went on to say, "You've seen sides of me that the public never knew existed. You are aware that beneath the Prince of Darkness facade was a person who genuinely loved his friends, family, and craft. You are aware that my most egregious actions were frequently motivated by pain rather than evil, by insecurity rather than conceit.
I want people to grasp that intricacy when they share my tale. After that, the letter contained a specific request that would alter Gene's perception of his contribution to Ozzy's legacy. In order to help people realize that I was more than just the news headlines and scandals, I'm asking you to be one of the guards of my real story, not to make me seem like a saint, because God knows I don't deserve that. That viewpoint is essential for anyone attempting to comprehend the true significance of my life, and you understood the guy behind the crazy. As he read it, Gene felt a great deal of responsibility because he knew that Ozzy was giving him a sacred obligation to preserve and communicate the more complex facets of his personality and profession. Ozzy's reflections on their mutual rock music heritage were the next section of the letter. Didn't we participate in something unique? Rock was redefined by that group of performers who demonstrated to the world that music could simultaneously be theater, art, resistance, and entertainment. Even though we were ostensibly rivals, we worked together as brothers in arms to push boundaries that others were scared to approach. Because it placed their individual accomplishments within the framework of their generation's collective contribution to popular culture, this contemplation of their common place in rock history was especially significant. According to Ozzy, future generations will examine our work not only as individual musicians, but also as members of a movement that permanently changed the music industry. My gloomy intensity and your theatrical approach were both manifestations of the same spirit of change. We demonstrated to the world that rock stars could be enormous without sacrificing their integrity. The letter then moved on to Ozzy's aspirations for Gene's future, demonstrating how deeply he cared for his friend's ongoing welfare. He wrote, I want you to continue creating, continuing to perform, continuing to be the Gene Simmons the world needs. Don't use my passing as a pretext to withdraw or begin considering endings. You still have a lot to offer, a lot of people to motivate, and a lot of boundaries to push. Because it demonstrated that Ozzy was considering his friends' futures rather than his own mortality, this encouragement was especially heartwarming. The letter asked, promise me that you'll continue to be outrageous, to challenge expectations, and to continue demonstrating to young musicians that you can have a long, successful career without sacrificing your vision. The world needs artists who don't mind being unique, who don't accept constraints, and who know that professionalism and rebellion can coexist. Ozzy's tone grew progressively more personal and exposed as the letter came to a close. I want you to know, Gene, that one of the greatest honors of my life has been your friendship. You provided sincere concern and enduring loyalty in a field full of phony connections and short-term ties. Even when I was at my worst, you never passed judgment on me. You helped me through my setbacks without being patronizing, and you rejoiced in my victories without feeling envious. As Gene read it, the weight of this tribute overcame him, realizing that Ozzy was using his last letters to convey appreciation that he would not have been able to articulate in their everyday exchanges. The letter went on to say, I don't think about the album sales, the awards, or the headlines when I think about my life. I reflect on times when I was able to connect with those who were important to me. Conversations with you, late-night discussions on tour buses, phone calls at trying times, and shared amusement over the ridiculousness of our chosen profession, are all part of many of my most cherished memories. Because they reflected the human side of their relationship, the portion that had nothing to do with success or celebrity and everything to do with a sincere friendship between two people who were aware of each other's particular struggles. These recollections struck a profound chord with Gene. Ozzy wrote, you showed me that it was possible to be both a friend and an entertainer, a performer and a human being. Your example demonstrated to me that leading an outstanding life did not necessarily equate to loneliness and that genuine relationships could be maintained. A parting gift from a friend who had always recognized the healing and inspirational power of words. The letter ended with a message that would remain with Gene for the rest of his life. Don't recall the sick person I ended up being when you think of me after I'm gone, my dear. Recall the young rebel who discovered a brother after meeting another young rebel years ago. Recall the music, the laughter, the dreams we had together, and the boundaries we crossed. Recall that our friendship served as evidence that genuine connection can exist even in the competitive rock and roll industry. I appreciate our friendship spanning 50 years, being there for me in my darkest hours and joining me in my happiest one. I appreciate you teaching me the value of loyalty, artistic integrity, and how to age with grace in a field that is fascinated with young people. I appreciate you allowing me to be Ozzy Osbourne, just as I was, and for being Gene Simmons, just as you are. My friend, the performance must continue. Continue the music. Keep the rebellion going. Continue to demonstrate to the world that rock and roll is more than simply loud music. It's a bridge between spirits, a way of life, and a method of speaking the truth. And occasionally, while you're performing and experiencing that timeless enchantment, remember that your brother Ozzy is still singing along in the background. John Michael Ozzy Osbourne signed the letter simply with all my love and eternal gratitude. Ozzy's last communication to Gene was so full of emotion and wisdom that he sat in silence for a long time after writing the letter. In addition to providing him with a fresh perspective on his own legacy and his duty to maintain Ozzy's authentic tale, the letter had illuminated facets of their connection that he had never quite comprehended or valued. Gene kept going back to the letter in the days that followed, uncovering fresh memories and levels of meaning with each reading. He realized that Ozzy's farewell present had been more than simply an expression of thanks. It had been a masterclass in friendship, a proof that bonds can grow beyond rivalry and ego to become truly transforming. In fact, Gene would carry the letter with him for the rest of his life as a cherished memento, and a manual for remembering his friend. He was reminded that their friendship had been based on sincere concern, respect for one another, and a common sense of what it meant to devote one's life to the transformational force of rock and roll, beyond all the makeup, costumes, and theatrical identities. In addition to being a buddy saying goodbye, Ozzy's final message to Gene reflected his own best traits, and challenged him to keep up the promise Ozzy had always seen in him. Long after the Prince of Darkness had made his farewell bow, the gift would still be given, serving as a reminder that certain ties are so powerful that they may withstand death itself. The fact that Gene Simmons shared Ozzy's parting words serves as a reminder that even rock stars are people with deep affection and appreciation. Their friendship serves as evidence that sincere connection may thrive even in the most improbable situations in a world that is frequently centered on rivalry and conflict. Please share this story if it touched you, and don't forget to express your gratitude to the people that matter most in your life while you still have the chance.